Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see all of you. What I'm going to do today, and I want to thank you for taking your time to be here. So, I want to share with you some ideas about social emotional well-being, some of the research behind it, and some of the ways that we can improve or enhance our social emotional well-being, and then think about some of the ideas I've developed in terms of conceptualizing what it means to thrive and this idea of wholeness. So I want to start out maybe differently than what we experience sometimes in these kinds of meetings. This is one of my favorite children's books as a gift. I've received three of these in a short period of time from people when I was a school district superintendent. And so this book means a lot to me. It's called What to Do with an Idea. So I just want to share a few pages with you. So it says one day I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered. What do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and fragile. I didn't know what to do with it. So I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away and I didn't talk about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as it was before my idea showed up. Skipping to the end, says, then one day something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings and took flight and burst into the sky. I didn't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world. So the way that I'm thinking about this idea is that there is a lot of research on the connections between our social, emotional, physical, intellectual, relational well-being and our health. These things are all related. And if we learn more about these things and we spread this knowledge and we think about ourselves as members of communities and with the responsibility for everyone in the community to be healthy, socially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually, then maybe we can change the world. As I think much of what ails us comes from within us. So I want to share a PowerPoint and some of these ideas, some of the research, as I mentioned, and some of the thinking, and maybe have a chance for you to talk a little bit amongst yourselves and see how these ideas, what they might mean to you. So I work in the educational leadership department at Highlands, and I've been here this is my third year. I'm blessed to serve in the School of Education. And so as I mentioned, our social emotional well-being has a lot to do with our physical well-being. So the way we think about our health changes our health. And this maybe is especially true when it comes to this point in our life and the elections and all the things we have going on in this infection. I wonder if, or this virus, I wonder if this is true. Optimistic people catch fewer infectious diseases than pessimists. I don't know the data. I wonder if that's true of the coronavirus. Optimists have better health. Our immune systems may work better when we're optimistic. Evidence suggests that optimists live longer than pessimists. So there's, as I mentioned, a lot of research behind how we think and then our physical well-being. So there was a study done many, many years ago by the Center for Disease Control and Dr. Vincent Felitti. And I think it's really interesting, some of the conclusions. I'm sure you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences. So the more negative experiences we have in our youth, such as abuse, neglect, if we were sexually abused, physically abused, mentally abused, if we were hungry, grew up in poverty, if our parents were divorced, if our parents were in prison, or had attempted suicide, or were depressed, then our chances of having negative health consequences, even if we live healthy lives, they increase according to the number of adverse childhood experiences in our lives. So even if I have had a lot of adverse childhood experiences and you haven't had very many, and we grow up both eating healthy, we don't smoke, we don't, we're not obese, still the chances of you dying at a younger age, or me with the person who had the negative childhood experiences, is much greater than the person who didn't. The stress, the anxiety, all those things follow us through our lives. And there are some exceptions, of course. This isn't true for every single person who experiences adverse childhood and adverse childhood experiences, or multiple experiences. And this study was done in Oakland, California, with mostly Caucasian, college-educated families. And it's been repeated with in different populations. So the health and well-being of our children is obviously extremely important to our entire society. We've all heard the more we spend on, there's some research that says for every $1 we invest in early childhood education, we get $16 in return. And things like avoiding special education and keeping kids out of prison, and reading abilities and those kinds of things. So it pays off to invest and have kids have healthy lives, healthy beginnings. So there is a flourishing center at the University of Pennsylvania, and Martin Seligman is the founder of this idea of positive psychology. So he and others have conceptualized ways that we can be well. So if we can experience positive emotions, we're engaged, thoughtfully engaged, if we have passion and meaning in our lives, we feel this sense of flow that Csikszentmihalyi has described in his research. If we're in positive, healthy relationships, if we have meaning in our lives, if we have a sense of accomplishment, and we are physically well, then these are the building blocks of a good life. Not surprising. And things like a lack of sleep, it's been said, is the new smoking. It's equivalent to the effects of smoking if we don't get enough sleep. We know how important it is to exercise and quiet our minds, to engage in mindfulness practices, meditation, those kinds of things, all very, very important. And this is a very short video from the University of Minnesota, and I'm going to see if you can hear this. It's just a couple of professors, I believe, from the University of Minnesota talking about this idea of PERMA-V. So I'm going to see if you can hear this.
Hello and welcome.
Can you hear?
So think back to your day.
Yes, we can hear.
Your well-being today. So we all know that well-being is important, right? But what contributes to it? So Denise and I like to use Martin Seligman's PERMA model to think about well-being, which has 5 components to it.
The first component is positive emotions. Take the time to really enjoy those emotions of gratitude and joy and contentment throughout your day.
The second one is an E for engagement, which is about having challenge in your life, but also using your strengths and your skills.
The third one is R for positive relationships. Now we know there's tons of research about the importance of social connections to your physical and your psychological health, and it even increases your lifespan.
M is for meaning, which is about having a greater purpose in your life beyond yourself.
And the fifth one of seligmans is accomplishment. Now we're not saying to just celebrate the really big accomplishments that you have in your life, but also the small ones, because they matter.
And then Amelia Jamatevskaya from the Flourishing Center added a sixth one that we really like, which is a V for vitality, right? So the V for vitality is really about your physical health and whether or not you're moving throughout your day and how you're feeling overall.
Right, it's taking account of your whole being. So throughout your day, your weeks, your months, your years, don't forget these 6 elements to up your well-being.
So P for positive emotions,
E for engagement,
R for positive relationships,
M for meaning,
and A for accomplishment,
and finally V for vitality.
So remember those 6 as you live and lead with intention.
So here's another model, and this comes from the Center for the Advancement of Academic and Social Emotional Learning, or CASEL, which focuses in schools, K-12 and preschools. And there's, again, a lot of research and a big conference on this work, a lot of writing in terms of how it affects or how to implement it in schools. So we can teach kids these skills, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness. We can teach kids to be aware of these things, to be aware of their thinking and their emotions and interactions and relationships. And since it's so important for our lifelong well-being, it seems critical that kids develop these skills. And there was a study out of Harvard University that started in the 1920s, and they were trying to figure out why people who go to Harvard, at the time it was all men, I believe, because their women weren't allowed at Harvard yet. Why do they do well? Is it genetic? What is it that allows them to have such high levels of achievement? And what they found by studying these people over 80 years, and they continue to study their offspring, is that the most important thing was the relationship, were their relationships in their lives. So the healthier the relationships, the healthier they were, the longer they lived, and the more that they achieved. And we know from other research that relationships, in fact, if you're in a strong, healthy relationship, you do live longer. You're more likely to overcome cancer, heart disease, those kinds of things. We know the effects of loneliness and isolation and how humans really need to interact. And I think this has really manifested itself during COVID, where we're seeing higher rates of depression and anxiety and maybe suicide and some of those things. So this study, I have the link here and I can share this. You can also look it up and read. There's several articles written about it. So David Bohm was a physicist during the World War II era. He came, I believe, from Poland, and he did a lot of studying of not just physics, but the way people talk and the way they listen to each other. So these are a few of his quotes, and there's a new documentary about his life that just recently came out, because he really bridged the ideas of physics and science with conversations. So one of the things he says in his book that relates to this third quote, even when we are behaving reasonably, our thinking is still trapped in our own chemistry. The essential problem is that the process itself happens so very quickly that we do not notice the game between impulse and response. So he talks about how important it is to have groups of people who interact and engage and talk about their thinking so that you can uncover maybe where your thinking is off. And a lot of the reading that I've done is around Peter Senge and his work on learning organizations. And he talks about different elements of learning organizations. And one of them deals with conversation, interaction. And he talks a lot about how when we're listening to other people, we often are just thinking in our own minds, how are we going to respond? Instead of really listening to what that person has to say, we often go up what he calls a ladder of inference. So somebody will say something or use a word and we'll start to make meaning from that. Like, oh my gosh, why did that person say that? That person doesn't like me. And that, that person thinks this, and why does that person, and pretty soon we're not listening. We're just thinking about one thing that they said and interpreting that. So he talks about the importance of an organization's of strategies to listen and ask people for meaning when you wonder about something. Inquire what led you to that conclusion, what's the data behind that statement, just to help us understand and not be not just draw conclusions. And obviously this is really important in relationships. How do we listen to each other? If relationships are so important, obviously communication is critical. So how do we listen to our partners and not just draw conclusions or develop a response in our own minds and just retort to that person? So again, I think we're seeing this so much in this in the animosity we have right now with our political, and a lot of people probably don't pay attention to it, but if you do, it can be quite emotional, at least for me. So Richard Rohr is, and I could see a misspelling there, I apologize. Richard Rohr is a mystic in Albuquerque, and he heads up the Center for Action and Contemplation. Maybe you're familiar with him. He's a Catholic trained as a priest, and he writes voraciously. And he does a lot of thinking about contemplation and devotion and things like that. Not your typical way of thinking about religion. I really enjoy his writing. So he says, humans prefer to see things in anecdotal and historical parts, even when such a view leads to incoherence, alienation, or hopelessness. So we tend to draw our own conclusions and share with like-minded people, and not necessarily consider the perspectives of others. So, and then Mark Brackett, psychologist at Yale, he recently wrote a book called Permission to Feel. And so there are ways that we can harness our thinking and be more aware of it. And he talks about and he has a program called Ruler, RULER, that's training for schools to help. And I know there are schools in New Mexico that use this. So if we can learn to identify, express, and harness our feelings, even the most challenging ones, we can use those emotions to help us create positive, satisfying lives. And then Susan David is another positive psychologist. And she wrote a book called Emotional Agility. So she says that our emotions are not directions. We can decide what we do with an emotion. We don't automatically have to get mad or sad or happy or anxious, worried, just because we have a thought. We can slow our thinking down and wonder about that thought. Where does this thought come from? Why is it that I think if I make one mistake and then I make another mistake, that those two mistakes are related? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're completely isolated. Or just because I make this mistake and I made it before doesn't mean I'm incompetent or I'm going to always make this mistake. So just ways of being aware. You know, even when emotions are difficult, I think a lot of us are taught to ignore them or to suppress them. And she talks about embracing, just like Mark Brackett did, being aware, thinking about your particular thought, be curious about it. Oh, that's an interesting thought. I wonder where that came from. And then decide what to do with it. Yes, I think this is something that's going to make me mad. You know, if you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off, or you cut someone off and their reaction is whatever it is, anger, maybe it's a hand signal, maybe they yell at you, maybe they cut you off again. Is that something, then how do you react to that? You know, I find myself getting emotional at times when that happens to me. So we can make decisions about our feelings and our emotions. And some more ideas about happiness. We used to think that happiness is derivative of, like, I'll be happy when I get this job, or I'll be happy when I make this amount of money, or I'll be happy when I have this relationship, or when this illness is over, or when I move. And in fact, they say, the research says that happiness comes first. So people who are happy, who emote happiness, they attract happiness. And people who are negative, just like when we looked at some of the research on optimism, people tend to attract, and I know you're fully aware of that. You know, we have people in every organization who are negative, and they tend to attract, sometimes that becomes the way we do things, you know, a negative environment. So some ways that we can think about happiness, and some suggestions for that. Always, like we said earlier, taking good care of yourself. It's probably not the end of the world. Richard Rohr writes a lot about how we feel isolated, and it's part of our culture in the United States to be, you know, the rugged individualism, and not true of every culture, but certainly true of our culture, I believe. You know, we're always trying to get ahead, one-up people, compare ourselves often. We see this in social media, things like that. So we don't have to do that. You know, even if something terrible is happening in our lives, we're probably not the only one who's experiencing that. Just like right now, my screen went out. I bet there's another person out of the 7 billion in the world whose screen also went out. So I'm not going to panic. Are you still there? Okay, let me see if I can. Maybe this is a good place. I'm probably just talking way too much anyway. So maybe this is a good place to stop for just a second or a few minutes. And if you're willing, you'd have to be willing, because I can only see a few of you. The rest of you have your cameras not on, which is completely your option. And maybe you're still in your PJs. So you don't have to turn your camera on, but if you're willing, I guess I can't put you into groups. I don't have that option right now. Does anybody have that option?
Let me see if I can make you the host.
Okay.
Hold on just a moment. And also, while I'm poking this, we have a question from Priscilla Ortegas-Mathis about, could you please define social well-being?
Yes. So I guess that relates with the relationships. So the healthiness of your relationships, I would say, is how you would define social well-being.
And I have made you the host, which means you're in charge of it
Okay.
all now, because apparently that takes me out of the whole co-hosting thing even. So
Okay,
you're
that
it.
makes me feel really important. So I'm going to put you into groups for about 3 or 4 minutes, and just have you have a conversation with some other people about this. So this will be a good time to help develop some social intelligence maybe, or emotional intelligence, which is a whole nother line of reasoning. So let's see, I'll check in. If nobody's talking, then you'll have to listen to me more. So there's a punishment. Here we go. So you should get an invitation to join.
Rod, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Sorry about that. So is there anything anyone wants to share? I was saying some really interesting stuff too. Is there anything anyone wants to share before we move on?
So,
Yes.
so Rod, that when your screen died and it had the sad face, I totally thought that was part of your presentation.
Did you? That's a good idea for the
It was
future.
so well timed with what you were saying. I was like, oh yeah, it's that. It's so
Like I planned it, huh?
yeah.
I'll have to remember that for the future. So one thing I wanted to share that I missed earlier was in that I mentioned the Vincent Felitti, Dr. Vincent Felitti, who's a medical doctor and was part of the original study on adverse childhood experiences. And what he was doing originally was studying obese women. And he interviewed hundreds of them. And he found out that one thing that they had in common was that about 55% of them had been sexually abused. And so he went and he did a lot more research into that. And he found, because of all these adverse experiences, you know, and shorter lifespans and more sickness, he studied what is it that helps people who have experienced all of these difficulties and challenges in their youth. Why is it that some people overcome them or aren't affected and others aren't? And so what he found was that in his study, there was a woman he studied who, as a child, had been taken into brothels and sold into prostitution by her father. And as she grew up, she eventually became like a circuit court judge, and she overcame 5 different types of cancer, not just cancer once, and not 5 times the same, but 5 different kinds of cancer. And she lived through all those things. And the thing that made the difference for her and so many other people is that just one person believed in her. Just one person took time to notice or to ask. And another thing that they found in all of that research, and Dr. Vincent Felitti talks about as I plug in my computer, is that so he thought when they discovered all these negative childhood experiences, that they would, you know, what are they going to do? Are they going to have therapy for, you know, millions of people who have had these struggles and consequences? What is it that they do? So what he found was similar to the research on the women that I mentioned, is pediatricians just asking patients, just saying, did you know, I noticed in your survey that you filled out that you had a lot of challenges in your youth. And did you know that can have a negative consequences on your life outcomes and your lifespan and your health? And just by having people know that, it makes a big difference, just awareness. So we can really make a difference. And there's the California now has a Surgeon General who's a former pediatrician and has written a book on adverse childhood experiences. And so they're really working to help increase awareness and to train pediatricians and other caregivers and healthcare professionals to be more aware of the effects of these things. So back to the slideshow. As I mentioned, the happiness advantage earlier. So happiness comes first. Happiness is a precursor to success, not merely a result. Happiness and optimism fuel performance. So cultivating the brain, more resilient, these kinds of things. Sean Aker has a book called The Happiness Advantage, and he's been on Oprah Winfrey Show and different places. So as has Richard Rohr, or on her podcasts that she does now, or her videos. And then there more work on positive psychology. What can we do? We can slow down. We can pay attention fully. We're so distracted, it seems like. We can pay attention to our senses. You know, so often we're in this world and we don't notice the world around us. Maybe we're walking down the street or driving by the mountains or looking out our windows, and pretty soon we don't see the beauty anymore. We get so familiar. We don't notice. We don't hear the birds sing. We don't maybe listen to our children's voices. We're just so engaged in life that we let it pass by quickly. So we can slow down and enjoy the moment. There's a practice called slow looking, and really, really asking ourselves to take a moment and enjoy and be fulfilled in that moment, not worried about the future or the past, but what's happening right now. And then helplessness. So Martin Seligman, I mentioned earlier, early in his career, he wrote a book called Learned Helplessness, or Learned Hopelessness. I guess they're the same thing. And did a lot of research on animals and dogs, and this was a long time ago. And so it's not really helplessness. We have to learn hopelessness, not helplessness. We have to learn hope. I'm sorry. He wrote a book called The Hope Circuit. He used to think that helplessness was something we learned, but we have to learn to be hopeful. We need parents who look us in the eye and talk to us and listen to us and care about us and ask us questions and answer our questions. And we need all this meaning and connections all throughout our lives. I often think what's good for children, you know, if infants who are in intensive care, if the best thing for them is to have skin to skin contact with their moms, if that's, you know, the healthiest thing and helps them grow and develop, then aren't those human relationships important for all of us all throughout our lives? The contact, you know, I think we're seeing a lot of that right now with our isolation. And so self-actualization, Scott Barry Kaufman wrote a book recently that looked again at Abraham Maslow's work on the hierarchy of needs. And so there's a lot of research on, again, relationship to emotional, social well-being, physical well-being, our thoughts, and some of the things we can do. And people who achieve who are self-actualized are tuned into these things, of the fresh appreciation of new things and novelty and acceptance. There's a research that says if we're just more grateful, you know, we're healthier. If we write thank you notes, or if we just take the time to appreciate people, to volunteer, to make a difference, and use our gifts, then we feel better. So it's a really interesting. I really enjoy Scott Barry Kaufman's work, psychologist. If you get a chance, Transcend is the name of the book, and he has a podcast also called the Psychology Podcast, where he interviews a lot of these psychologists. And then this idea, as I just mentioned, greater life satisfaction, curiosity, self-acceptance, positive relationships, all the things we talked about in terms of the PERMA V. And then Angela Duckworth out of the University of Pennsylvania has written a book called Grit and did a lot of research, and the same thing with positive psychology. People who are oftentimes your grit, your perseverance, your persistence toward goals are better predictors of how well you do than your IQ. And so we know kids, when we have them read things they're interested in, they read at a higher level, especially kids who struggle to read. That's true. So the more interest we have, the more passion we have, then the harder we try, the more we grow, and the more our potential grows. So just thinking about what this means for our students, you know, at Highlands, intending to serve students who are maybe first generation, maybe their parents didn't have an opportunity for education, maybe they're English language learners, come from low-income homes. What does this mean for them in terms of how we engage and work with them, what we teach them, what we measure? And I think that's the end. So I just want to show you one more thing that is some thinking that I've done. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, we know all these things about social emotional well-being, and we know a lot about achievement in terms of student achievement and how kids do in school. We measure intelligence. We have kids take standardized tests, and that's pretty much the way we determine their success, if you will, in schools, as a test that they take. And yet there's so much more to it. You know, if we can teach kids to live healthy lives, to be gritty, to persevere, to pay attention to their emotions and develop strong relationships, they'll probably have healthier, longer lives, and they'll overcome challenges, and it'll probably cost us less as a society in the long run for their care. And, you know, a lot of people who are in prison are illiterate and have mental health issues. And if we can help with those things, you know, prevention to me is really key in our world. And I think everybody is deserving. I often wonder if people who are impoverished and struggling and wondering where their next meal comes from if they have access to this kind of knowledge about their social emotional well-being, or if they're so engrossed in just existing or living that there's not much else they can think about. And probably especially true now, even as I think I heard some of you say, and when we broke out, with you working from home and your kids going to school from home and maybe your partner on the computer, there's so much stress. And so how can, what happens what does it mean for someone really to achieve? So what does it take for someone to achieve? What are the ingredients to achievement? And so a few years ago, let's see. Can you see this? A few years ago, I took a class, I took a certificate program called, let's see what it's called. It was in positive psychology, Certificate of Advanced Positive Psychology. And there's a program out of the University of Pennsylvania that's like an MBA, executive, but you can get this training from Martin Seligman and others. So I thought about this and how I would measure it, or how do people achieve? So this idea of consciousness, we construct our own reality. Every bad outcome is a result of a set of bad stories that we tell ourselves or that we consent to. Every is a pretty strong word, but if you believe that, how might things change? So I thought about this idea of spectacles and the lenses through which we view the world, and sort of these lines of sight. If you go into a theater, it's designed so that everybody in the theater can see and everybody in the theater can hear. Even if you're in the last seat, you still have an excellent view to the stage and you can hear people, so you can hear the actors and they don't need microphones. So thinking about these different ideas, wanting people to thrive, to have PERMA, in their lives. So I called these lines of sight, these strengths of relationships, of your heart, strength of your mind, strength of your body, strength of your will. And then I tried to think about it in terms of mathematical equation, and I'm not a mathematician, and I'm pretty sure that you can't do this mathematically, but maybe somebody else knows. So we choose for their own sake in the efforts to flourish. These are the rock bottom elements of human well-being. Maybe the secret to life is already known, and it's based on nature, and it's based on human interactions, and maybe heaven is here on earth, and we just need to notice it. And we figure out when we're all in this together, and that a lot of what happens is determined by what we think. Maybe if we decided that and believed that, we could be better humans, and humanity could be better. So if we have this experience, this success, this sense of accomplishment, so these achievements, in order to achieve, you have to have positive emotions. When you add those up, and you multiply those by the opportunities to experience positive emotions. And when you have relationships and you multiply the positive relationships in your life, and when you have vitality and you multiply vitality by your opportunities to have exercise and enough sleep, meditation, those kinds of things, when you really have opportunities to engage your mind, to make meaning, to have things that you feel you're really good at, where you can contribute and be positive. And then you have experience and you engage. When these things happen collectively, the more opportunities we get, then the healthier we are, not only as individuals, but as a society. So achievements, academic, otherwise, equate to positive emotions, relationships, and vitality multiplied by the level of how engaged are we and how much meaning do we get from it. minus the ways we view, interpret, and engage in life squared. So if we take out the negatives and we view the world through a lens of positives and possibilities and understanding our thinking, then maybe we can be change agents like this, and maybe an idea can really have a profound influence, not only of people of means, people who are wealthy or well-educated or whatever, have opportunities. Maybe this is true for everyone. So I think that we can choose not only personally how we are in our lives, how we feel, our health, not always. Of course, that's not always true, but often we can also do that in our organizations. We can choose how we want our learning places of work to feel when we're intentional about it, and how we communicate and what we say and the messages we send and how we treat other people, how we listen, or, the ideas of institutional bias and some of those things. So what I really wanted to do today was just share with you a whole bunch of information, which I think I succeeded at that anyway, and just have you have some things to think about. And if you're interested, I can share this PowerPoint, and I have all these books that I've read and a lot more. And so I'm passionate about this, and appreciate you tuning in. So I think I'm done.
Are there any questions? Would anyone like to unmute themselves and ask a question?
I'll ask a question. Hi, Rob. My name is Felicia.
Hi, Felicia.
you.
Nice to meet you.
I love all this stuff too. Super interesting to me. I'm on the State Board of Education in Nevada. So
Wow. Oh my
super,
gosh.
super big on pushing SEL for all of our students, especially right now. But I was wondering if we could do a mind meld. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, but where do you see the work going nationally? I know that, I know where it is in the education landscape, but, Angela Duckworth came out with a book about grit like 10 years ago, and everybody got real into that. And now it's social emotional learning. Where do you think the work is going now?
Well, I think many more schools are becoming aware of this, and I think we're seeing, because of COVID, we're seeing we can't really test kids like we used to, and so maybe it opens an opportunity for us to really think about what's important for children in their lives and what it really means for them to be smart. Scott Barry Kaufman developed an idea that I was going to put it in there, but I forgot, and I have a picture of it on my phone as I'm taking a class with him right now. Of this individual intelligence. He says, intelligence is a dynamic interplay of engagement and ability in the pursuit of personal goals. So we really can't know how smart a child is unless we see them engage, where they're doing something where they're highly engaged. And then you think about the social emotional well-being of teachers and how that's been affected recently, and administrators. I hear from my students the stress that their administrators are under and just trying to figure this out. So I'm hoping that this is going to make us much more aware of the importance of our social emotional well-being for everybody involved, and give us an opportunity to step back from standardized tests. Because I think it often takes a long time. Like you said, Angela Duckworth wrote that book maybe 10 years ago, and we're just kind of starting to talk about it. And it takes a long time for us to change, So maybe this is like an eye-opening opportunity for us to really rethink if we take advantage of it. I hope we will.
Keyword right there. So I just got done with a 2-day board meeting. I'm on the Wested board of directors.
Oh, nice.
So you're probably familiar with that. They're a huge research and organization, and we're doing a lot of work in that area.
Good for you.
But one of the things that we're really looking at as an emerging opportunity with COVID is really changing the system, blowing it up, about how could we potentially do education different instead of the main thing that came out of our meeting today was that we've for so long looked at education being synonymous with learning in a classroom, and that's not necessarily true.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm all about hopefully avoiding standardized tests this year. I struggle with that from my role on the state board, because so much of what we do is accountability, making sure that, you know, children are actually being educated and treated right and so forth. And if we can't measure, we can't tell if that's not happening. So it's a little bit of a struggle, but I think that that this has been super good presentation. I look forward to
Thank you.
going through the slide deck in the recording a little bit more and digging into some of the other books you suggested.
Well, there's another researcher who lives in Santa Fe. His name is Ron Richard, and he's out of Harvard, and he writes about, him and others, about making thinking visible and, you know, using thinking routines. And he talks about long term. So what are our students doing 10 years after they're out of our schools? You know, how do they feel? How are they as citizens? How are they as husbands or wives? Or you know, how are they as workers? Do they feel like they were prepared? Were they able to achieve their goals? Do they feel like they can make their dreams a reality? I think if we take a longer term view of education, in my own opinion, and we start to measure how people do after they're gone, how healthy are they?
Graduation rates.
Yeah. Because I mean, I just read something in one of these books before we came on that like 50% of adults are not engaged in their work. And that's probably way more true now than ever before.
Yep.
So, and we, you know, there's a whole study by, there's a book called In Search of Deeper Learning that maybe you've heard of, where these researchers went out and studied, identified, I know I'm out of time. Anyway, In Search of Deeper Learning, where they really looked for deep learning in schools, even really excellent schools, and they didn't find many, even where they were suggested to go. You know, a lot of kids are not engaged.
Yeah.
Especially as they get older. So,
and especially on devices.
Yeah. So I hope this is a big opportunity for us to change how we think about what it means to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. So nice meeting you.
Oh, nice to meet you. So thank you all. Anybody else?